Let me tell you about a clay tablet that sat in a basement for 43 years. Not because it was unimportant, but because the people who found it had no idea what they were holding. And when one person finally figured it out, she walked away from her entire career to make sure most of the world never read it. This is not a story about ancient mythology. It is not a retelling of old Sumerian legends you half remember from a history class. This is a story about a specific document, found in a specific place, translated by a specific woman who sat at her kitchen table for 11 nights and then stopped sleeping properly for 3 weeks. And when you hear what she found, you will understand exactly why. The Iraq Museum in Baghdad holds tens of thousands of artifacts. Most of them are catalogued, studied, published, argued over by academics, and eventually forgotten by everyone else. In 1976, a clay tablet arrived in the museum's inventory after being pulled from a salvage dig near the ancient site of Eridu in southern Iraq. The field notes described it as fragmentary and unimportant. Someone logged it, boxed it, shelved it in the basement, and the world moved on. For 43 years, that is exactly where it stayed. In 2019, a graduate student named Lena drew the late shift at the museum. She was finishing her cataloging hours, the tedious administrative work that every serious scholar has to grind through before anyone lets them near the real research. She had spent 6 years studying archaic Sumerian, the old dialects that almost nobody reads anymore. The cuneiform shapes so ancient they barely resemble the standard versions, taught in universities. When she turned that tablet over under the light and looked at it properly for the first time since 1976, she saw something every cataloger before her had completely missed. It was not broken. It was not partial. It was complete. Written corner to corner in a dialect so old that it had been mistaken for damage. She photographed it that night and took the images home. Picture her at her kitchen table, one lamp on. Ma photographs spread edge to edge across the surface. A pencil, a reference dictionary that keeps failing her because the dialect is older than most dictionaries account for, and a silence that deepens with every line she successfully decodes. She worked alone for 11 nights. In all that time, she only translated 6 lines, and by the 6th line, she put the pages face down, did not return to the museum for 3 weeks. And when she finally did come back, she asked for a meeting with the chief curator. In a letter she later wrote to a colleague at the British Museum, she recorded the exact words she used in that meeting. "It is not a hymn," she told him, "not a king list, not an economic record. It is a transcript. Someone wrote down exactly what he said in the order he said it, while he was still saying it." She would not put the name of the speaker in that letter. She only underlined the word transcript twice. To understand why a single underlined word could keep a trained scholar out of her own workplace for 3 weeks, you have to understand who was speaking on that tablet and what he was about to admit. In the Sumerian written record, Enki is the second son of Anu, the supreme ruler of the Anunnaki Council. He is the younger brother of Enlil, the strict administrator, the one who drafted the council's laws and enforced them without hesitation, including the decision to destroy humanity in the Great Flood. Enki was Enlil's opposite in almost every measurable way. Where Enlil maintained distance, Enki stayed close. Where Enlil saw the human project as a failed experiment worth ending, Enki kept treating it as something worth saving. The texts call him many things across thousands of years of Sumerian writing. The Lord of the Earth, the Lord of Sweet Waters, the Crafter, the Shaper. But the title that appears most consistently, the one that comes closest to describing what he actually did, does not translate cleanly into English. The literal Sumerian means something like the one who knows what is hidden. He was the keeper of knowledge the council did not want distributed, the genetic blueprints that constructed the human form, the astronomical maps of the heavens, the mathematics of time, and the design of something the texts refer to simply as the gate. Most traditional readings treat the gate as a physical doorway somewhere in his city of Eridu, a door you could walk through if you found it. The translation Lena was working from says something considerably stranger. The gate was a passage between this world and what the Sumerians called the upper waters, their term for the dimension or reality the Anunnaki came from and returned to. It was how they entered the earth and left it again. And in their understanding of things, Earth was not a home. It was one location among many. The tablet itself has a strange history even before Lena touched it. It was excavated in 1968 from a site near ancient Eridu during a salvage dig described in the field notes as rushed and underfunded. It came from a chamber beneath what had once been a temple platform, a chamber labeled ceremonial. 43 items were recovered from that chamber total. 41 were ordinary, pottery shards, broken bowls, a copper pin. 2 were not ordinary. One was a small carved stone disc covered in markings that have never been formally published. The other was the tablet. Both went to Baghdad. The stone disc disappeared during the looting of the museum in 2003 and has never resurfaced. The tablet survived for one reason only. It was in the basement, in a crate, in the wrong drawer. It survived by being forgotten, which is perhaps the most unsettling part of all of this, because it suggests the tablet was supposed to be forgotten. And the fact that it was not may have been the one failure in a very deliberate plan. The tablet contains 7 statements, 7 things Enki said in sequence. In his own words, at the moment he sealed the gate behind him for the last time. And the first statement breaks the entire familiar picture of who these beings were in a single sentence. The literal translation reads, "We are not who you were told we are." The pronoun is collective. He's not speaking about himself alone. He's speaking about the Anunnaki as a whole, and he is opening his final transmission by telling whoever is listening that the entire framework people had been handed to understand these beings was a constructed story. Not a lie in the simple sense, a useful shape, a manageable version of reality that early human civilizations could hold in their heads and work with. Something that allowed the first cities to cooperate with forces they could not begin to comprehend. But it was not accurate. And the next line makes that clear in a way that dismantles everything. The Anunnaki, Enki says, are not the originators, not the creators of the universe, not gods in the sense that word later came to mean. They are, in his exact phrasing, the inheritors of what was already here. Something else, something older, built the structures they used, the gates, the technology, the biological templates that the human form was eventually constructed from. The Anunnaki arrived and found all of it already in place, learned how to operate it, and became the administrators of a system they did not design. The original builders are named exactly once. Enki calls them the ones who began. Then he says nothing more about them. No description, no history, not a single additional detail. That absence is not accidental. It reads like someone who either cannot say more or has decided not to. The implication is enormous. The beings credited in the oldest written records on Earth with creating humanity, with handing civilization to the first cities, with designing the genetic structure of the human form. By their own keeper's account, they were caretakers, running machinery they did not invent, working inside a system they did not own, on behalf of someone who had stopped responding a very long time ago. Every gift the Anunnaki ever gave was given by a staff that had lost contact with the people who hired them, which immediately raises the question Enki answers next. If they were only the staff, then what exactly were we? The second statement moves out of theology and into biology, and it is the one that stops being about them and starts being entirely about you. Enki says, "You were not the first." The Sumerian word for first here is precise. It does not mean first in time in a vague sense. It means first in sequence. There were earlier versions of the human form, and the second statement names how many. 7 previous iterations of humanity came before the version currently living on this planet. Each was a complete design. Each was attempted on Earth. Each failed in a specific, named way. The first could not reproduce at all. The second could reproduce, but the line died out. No offspring viable past the 3rd generation. The 3rd was biologically viable, but so aggressive toward its own kind that the entire population collapsed within a few centuries. The 4th was peaceful, but cognitively limited. It could not operate the technology the Anunnaki kept trying to hand it. The 5th had the intelligence for it, but could not coordinate at scale, could not build anything larger than itself. The 6th could coordinate beautifully, and then turned collectively self-destructive in a way the Anunnaki never fully diagnosed, and were never able to correct. The 7th is the one Enki lingers on. And this is where the statement starts to feel genuinely disturbing. By every measure the project had ever set, the 7th worked. It reproduced, it coordinated, it built. It operated the technology. It was peaceful. It was intelligent. It was socially stable. It was biologically durable. It was, in plain terms, exactly what the entire long experiment had been trying to produce. And it was retired anyway. Enki does not say why. The statement closes on one line. The 8th is what remains. We are the 8th iteration. And according to Enki, we are not an improvement on the 7th. We are the version that came after the version that succeeded. That word, retired, carries the full weight of what the statement is saying, and the tablet does not soften it anywhere. A failed design gets scrapped. The 7th did not fail. It hit every target the project had ever set, and it was ended on schedule regardless. Which means the thing that decides whether a version of humanity continues was never actually about whether it succeeded. It was about something else, something Enki either would not or could not name. And that forces a genuinely uncomfortable question into the room. If being a success was not enough to save the 7th, then what exactly is the 8th still here to do? The 3rd statement is the one that created the most conflict among translators. The literal phrase renders as, "The great water was not punishment, it was maintenance." For as long as scholars have read the Sumerian flood narrative, the working assumption has been that the gods, Enlil foremost among them, drowned humanity because humanity had misbehaved. Overpopulation, noise, disruption. The gods were annoyed and they acted. Now, the third statement steps directly into that interpretation and contradicts it. The flood was a scheduled event. It was a periodic reset of the entire biosphere that the Council had run on Earth before, on every previous iteration. It was not a response to anything the 8th iteration had done. It was a calendar entry. The behavior of every human alive at the time was, in this telling, completely beside the point. The water was coming, regardless of how anyone acted. What was not scheduled was Enki. He broke council law. The statement contains a line translated as, "I was instructed to allow it. I instead instructed Ziusudra." Ziusudra is the Sumerian name for the figure the Hebrew Bible later remembered as Noah. The flood was meant to close the book on the 8th iteration quietly, on schedule, and Enki reached down and warned a single family. That warning broke a standing order. By his own account, it was the first time he had ever moved against the council in any way that genuinely mattered. And the third statement makes clear that everything that came afterward, every gift he gave humanity, every piece of knowledge he handed down, started right there, with one act of defiance he was never supposed to commit. He saved us once. The fourth statement is what it cost him. The fourth statement is the only one in the entire transmission where Enki speaks purely in the first person. No council, no human population, no outside party, just himself. The literal translation reads, "I broke the law of the council to save you, and I will not be allowed to return." This line appears nowhere else in the surviving Sumerian record. None of the standard mythological cycles contain it. As far as anyone has been able to determine, this is the only place in all of ancient writing where Enki speaks directly about what saving humanity from the flood actually cost him. The price was permanent. The council closed the gate against him. And in his own words, "The door I am sealing was sealed against me first." Read that again, slowly. The door he tells us he is sealing from the inside is a door he had already been locked out of. He is not guarding the entrance. He is shutting himself in with us on the wrong side of his own exile. He was not choosing to stay. He was already excluded, and he was choosing to close the door himself rather than leave it open, for reasons that become clear in the 6th and 7th statements. Then come 3 short lines that arrive without cushioning. "I knew what I was doing. I knew what it would cost. I did it anyway." That is not the voice of a god as anyone usually imagines one. It is the voice of someone who made a deliberate trade and is saying so clearly, on record, while the door is still open enough to speak through. And before the 4th statement closes, he names the 7 council members who voted to exile him. The names are recognizable, senior Anunnaki figures who appear throughout the rest of the Sumerian record, 7 of them. The vote was unanimous. It was held while he was absent. The decision was final and immediate. What he does not do is record them as enemies. He records them as colleagues. The figures he had worked alongside for the entire length of the project, not one of whom abstained. Not one of whom looked at what he had done for a single human family and thought it worth dissenting over. That is the company he kept right up to the moment he sealed the door on all of them, himself included. The 5th statement opens with a phrase that has come out identical in every translation attempt since the first academic effort more than a century ago. Scholars working independently in different eras with different reference materials, all landing on exactly the same words. What is taught cannot be untaught. Older readings took that as a vague philosophical observation about wisdom in general. The translation Lena was working from says it was nothing vague at all. Enki was naming specific bodies of knowledge he personally transmitted to humanity during the time he lived among people near Eridu, and he lists them in the order he gave them. He gave the first farmers wheat cultivated up from wild grass, and the agricultural calendar that told them when to plant, and the irrigation channels that carried water to fields the rain never reached. He gave them metalworking, copper, then bronze, then iron, not as a series of lucky accidents stumbled upon over generations, but as deliberate steps in a sequence whose endpoint he already knew. He gave them the city itself, the layout of streets, the management of water, the storage of grain across lean seasons, and the writing system that had to be invented simply to keep track of who owned what, and who owed what to whom. Then he gave them the sky, the lunar cycles, the movement of planets, the slow procession of constellations through the great astronomical year. And then he gave them something the 5th statement identifies as the most important of all, and the thing that was eventually taken away. He taught humans how to extend the length of their own lives, not immortality, nothing that clean or complete, but a precise and specific pattern of diet and behavioral practice that, if a person maintained it consistently, would allow them to live for several hundred years. The priest kings of the earliest Sumerian dynasties practiced it. Their lifespans, recorded in the king lists at numbers modern historians dismiss as mythological exaggeration, were, according to the tablet, simply accurate. And the patriarchs of the Hebrew Bible, who the text records as having lived for centuries, were not the product of narrative inflation. They were the last generation still maintaining the pattern Enki had taught. Somewhere between ancient Eridu and those patriarchs, the practice disappeared. Except the 5th statement says it did not disappear. It was suppressed, deliberately removed by a rival faction aligned with Enlil, who wanted human lifespans kept short on purpose, so that no single person could ever accumulate real knowledge across the full arc of a long life and begin asking the kind of questions that accumulation makes possible. The shortening of human life, in Enki's account, was the single most damaging thing ever done to the 8th iteration. It forced every generation to start from near zero. It guaranteed that knowledge could not compound across individual experience the way it would across a life of 400 or 500 years. And it ensured that no one would ever live long enough to work out what had been done to them and why. We are not just short-lived by nature, we were made short-lived by design, so we would never reach the questions the 6th statement is built around. The 6th statement describes the door itself, and it is not what you are imagining. In Enki's phrasing, the gate is not a constructed object. It is a thinness, a place where the membrane between this physical reality and the upper waters runs closer to the surface than anywhere else. There are specific locations on Earth, the tablet says, where this thinness is a permanent feature of the geography. At those places, with the correct knowledge and the correct signal, a passage can be opened. The Anunnaki used them routinely. They arrived through them, departed through them, came back through them across the full length of their involvement with Earth. The gate at Eridu was one of the major ones, and according to the 6th statement, it was the largest access point on the surface of the planet. What waits on the other side is not paradise and not any version of heaven. It is the place the Anunnaki operated from, the council chambers, the record archives, the place where decisions about Earth's future are made. And it is where the things the council judged too significant or too dangerous to leave accessible on the surface of the Earth were sent for long-term storage. Enki has a phrase for that storage that does not translate cleanly into English. The closest any translator has managed is the cabinet of what was tried. The cabinet holds the 7 previous iterations of humanity, their genetic blueprints, the documented record of each failure, the behavioral data. And here's the line that made Lena set down her pencil and stop working for the night. Actual physical specimens of each of those 7 earlier versions, held in a state of suspension the Anunnaki engineered specifically for the long preservation of biological material that the Council would neither destroy nor release. The Sumerian word for their condition combines 3 distinct concepts: preserved, sleeping, waiting. They are not dead, but they are not alive in any sense you would recognize. And according to Enki, they remember everything that happened to them before they were retired. That is why he sealed the door. The gods, Enlil foremost among them, drowned humanity because humanity had misbehaved. Overpopulation, noise, disruption. The gods were annoyed and they acted. Now, the 3rd statement steps directly into that interpretation and contradicts it. The flood was a scheduled event. It was a periodic reset of the entire biosphere that the Council had run on Earth before, on every previous iteration. It was not a response to anything the 8th iteration had done. It was a calendar entry. The behavior of every human alive at the time was, in this telling, completely beside the point. The water was coming, regardless of how anyone acted. What was not scheduled was Enki. He broke council law. The statement contains a line translated as, "I was instructed to allow it. I instead instructed Ziusudra." Ziusudra is the Sumerian name for the figure the Hebrew Bible later remembered as Noah. The flood was meant to close the book on the 8th iteration quietly, on schedule, and Enki reached down and warned a single family. That warning broke a standing order. By his own account, it was the first time he had ever moved against the council in any way that genuinely mattered. And the 3rd statement makes clear that everything that came afterward, every gift he gave humanity, every piece of knowledge he handed down, started right there, with one act of defiance he was never supposed to commit. He saved us once. The 4th statement is what it cost him. The 4th statement is the only one in the entire transmission where Enki speaks purely in the first person. No council, no human population, no outside party, just himself. The literal translation reads, "I broke the law of the council to save you, and I will not be allowed to return." The astronomical alignment, according to Lena's restricted dissertation, the one she defended in 2023 and then placed under a publication restriction at her own request before leaving the field of Sumerology entirely, resolves to a window inside the present century. The abstract of that dissertation, the only part publicly readable, describes the 7th statement as an internally consistent astronomical prediction whose calculated window falls somewhere between 2028 and 2063. 3 astronomers are reported to have independently checked her calculations and arrived at the same window. None of them has agreed to be named in print. Nothing has been formally published. Treat it as a claim and not a confirmed finding, but hold the claim clearly in your mind. The tablet itself, according to the museum's own published inventory, was moved from open storage into a secured, climate-controlled vault in late 2021, logged as a routine preservation measure. Make of that timing whatever you like. What is not disputable is that no further translation work on it has been published since. In 2015, a small international research team briefly revisited the original chamber where the tablet was found in 1968. They reported one feature that the original field notes had completely omitted: a circular depression in the center of the chamber floor, roughly 2 meters across, its inner surface polished smooth by a process that matched no known tool or technique in the Sumerian archaeological record. The team photographed it, filed their report, and the report was archived. It has not been published. There is one last detail before I let you go, and it is not about the tablet at all. It is about the woman who translated it. Lena spent 6 years mastering an archaic dialect almost nobody reads. She drew the late shift on a night she could have asked someone to cover. She turned over a tablet that had been incorrectly identified as worthless for 43 years and immediately recognized what everyone before her had missed. She worked alone at her kitchen table for 11 nights, translated 6 lines, and stopped. She went back. She finished it. She defended a dissertation built around it. And then she placed her own work under a publication restriction and walked away from her career in Sumerology permanently. Not because she had failed, because she had succeeded. Somewhere in a secured vault in Baghdad, a clay tablet that should not have survived is sitting in a climate-controlled drawer. The stone disc that was found alongside it in 1968 is gone, looted in 2003 and never recovered. The circular polished depression in the floor of the ceremonial chamber beneath the old temple platform at Eridu is sitting unreported in a filed-away document that has never been published. The tablet contains 7 statements. The first tells us the beings we called gods were themselves staff. The second tells us we are the 8th attempt, and the 7th succeeded. The third tells us the flood was maintenance, not punishment. The fourth tells us Enki paid a permanent price for warning one family. The fifth tells us the knowledge of how to live long lives was taken from us deliberately. The sixth tells us the door was sealed not to protect us from something outside, but from a truth about ourselves. And the 7th tells us the door will open on its own schedule, whether anyone wants it to or not. 2 of his 3 conditions are already met. The third, the signal, the sound not yet made on this earth, is the only one still uncertain. And the one question nobody closest to this tablet will answer directly is whether the wall of electromagnetic noise humanity throws into the atmosphere every single second of every single day has already, without anyone intending it, produced that sound. The tablet does not say what happens the day the door opens. It ends at that sentence. Then one final symbol, the archaic Sumerian notation for end of transmission. Whatever Enki said after that, if he said anything at all, was either never written down, or it was written down and has not surfaced yet. A door sealed from the inside, a window we are already inside of, and a signal whose status no one will confirm or deny. That is where this ends. The next question is yours.